Okay, welcome back. It's time now to move on to deploy on-premise components for our site recovery solution. And so let's get right into it. The assumption here now is that we've completed that everything you see over here on the right side is at least deployed, maybe not configured, but deployed. And now we're going to use the Recovery Services Vault to start deploying our primary data center site over here. And so the assumption here is that we have a Hyper-V and SCVMM solution. We will, in upcoming videos, do other scenarios as well. So let's take a look at what that solution looks like. We're basically on this slide showing a VMM server right here, which has what is known as a site recovery provider installed. So we have to install some software on our VMM server that is known as a site recovery provider. And then we have to install recovery agents on our Hyper-V hosts. Okay, in my case, I'm going to have a single VMM server with a single Hyper-V host that has a couple of VMs running on it. Ultimately, when this setup is complete, we're going to be replicating data out through the firewall here, and it's going to be completely secured or encrypted, as we talked about, and it's going to land on Azure storage that is also encrypted. So let's move on to the portal and take a look at the process here. So here we are in our vault that we just created in the previous video. And if you remember, I pointed out this Getting Started section here. That's a great section because it gives you step-by-step instructions of how to proceed. And you can see for site recovery, we have 3 general steps. We have prepare infrastructure, replicate applications, and manage recovery plans. So the first thing, obviously, is prepare infrastructure. That is referring to on-premise infrastructure. And so that step 1 has 5 steps of its own. Step 1 is it's wanting to understand the scenario of the options we have available to us that we're going to use. So where do I want to replicate? Do I want to replicate to Azure, or do I want to replicate to my own recovery site? So we're going to choose Azure. And it says, are your machines virtualized? We're going to say yes, they're virtualized with Hyper-V. Further, we're going to choose that they are managed with VMM. So if we didn't have VMM, we could do just a Hyper-V configuration, and we're going to go through that as well. Okay, I'm going to click OK there. And then as we move through this process, these steps that you see going forward are dynamic, and they change based on our choices from before. Okay, so the first thing we see here is that step 1 is that we have to select our VMM server. Step 2 is select our cloud, which is referring to a cloud on the VMM server. And step 3 is configure our hosts. Oh, so this screen could be a little bit confusing at first, but you can see there's a plus button up here, and that's how we get our VMM server to show up in Azure. So this has a set of steps as well. Now this looks like a lot of complication, but it really boils down to just a few things. We have to download the software, that site recovery provider that we just talked about, and we have to download a registration key for our vault. What this basically does is when you're doing the install of your site recovery provider, it needs to know what it's connecting to, and that is through a vault registration key. So once we go through the install, which we're going to demo here, and we plug in our vault registration key, that basically connects VMM to our vault, our specific vault here. So that's basically how it gets connected to your own subscription in Azure. So anything else here? Note that we do give you some guidance on what URLs have to be available through your firewall to access. We pointed that out in our other video when we were looking at the requirements of VMM. Now, the second part here, so that's our VMM site recovery provider. We also have to register each of our Hyper-V hosts. So you'll note here that we have a little bit of information that says you don't need these steps if you're replicating to a secondary VMM site. So that's not necessary if you're doing site to site of your own. If you are going to Azure, you must also download and install these tool sets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and download these. Once I have them downloaded, we're going to go through the process of installation. Okay, here we are on our VMM server, and I wanted to point out a few things about this server before we get started with our installation. I'm on the VMs and Services tab here. What I want to point out is this cloud that I've created.
called primary site. We have to have a cloud in SCVMM to configure and replicate SCVMM virtual machines. So you do have to have a cloud. In addition, you have to make sure your virtual machines are in the cloud. I've got this cloud selected so I can see my virtual machines showing up. That means they're in the cloud, and I also see here that they say primary site. If you create a new cloud in VMM, what you really need to do is to get your virtual machines in that cloud. It's just a property of those virtual machines. So if I click on one of my virtual machines here and go to properties, we can see right away that there's a property right on the default page here that shows the cloud settings for the virtual machine. So if it's a brand new cloud that you're configuring, you'll just drop this down and select your cloud and then click OK. And that will assign your virtual machine to the cloud. Okay, so those are the requirements. And so let's go ahead and install our tools here. So I want to minimize my VMM console, and I've downloaded the files as I mentioned in the last video. They're in this folder called ASR Downloads. And we've got our Azure Site Recovery Provider. This is the actual VMM, the provider that goes on the VMM server. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that installation. And it's going to extract some files. And then we're just going to get a wizard here to get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to see here is that it's telling us that the System Center Virtual Machine Manager service has to be stopped. This is going to do that for us, so I'm just going to click OK. It will stop the service, and then it's going to continue with the setup. Okay, so the wizard is launched here, and it's just asking us to make some choices about updates. I'm certainly wanting to check for updates from Microsoft Updates. I'm going to select Next there. I am to choose an installation location. I'm going to select Install. Okay, so what it's basically doing is it's installing the service on the VMM server, and we're eventually going to see a snap-in or an add-in to our VMM console, which we will see once we relaunch VMM. Now, with the installation complete here, it's going to ask us to continue to register the server in the Azure Site Recovery Vault. So at this point, the software is installed, but it doesn't know anything about our Azure Vault that we created. So we're going to register the server, and we're going to choose the file that we downloaded as part of the site recovery deployment. And that file is located on my ASR Downloads folder here. This basically provides all the information about the subscription, as you can see, and the vault name. So it links this VMM this installation directly to our vault. I'm going to click Next here. I am going to connect directly to Site Recovery because I don't have a proxy server. And this is basically going to check connectivity to Azure Site Recovery and configure the provider. Now, once this is complete, our Site Recovery service is going to recognize our VMM server because it has reached out and registered itself. Okay, now the registration has been completed, and we can see now that it's just letting us know that data for virtual machines that are sent to Site Recovery will be encrypted, and it's providing the location to save a certificate. I'm going to leave that as default and click Next. The next question here is, do I want to sync all of my SCVMM cloud data to Azure Site Recovery, or do I want to wait and just sync one cloud at a time? So in my case, I only have a single cloud. I definitely want to sync all of my cloud metadata to Azure, so I'm going to leave this as default. If you already had a number of clouds in place and you had created one specifically for VMM, you could uncheck this and then go back and sync only the specific clouds that you want. So I'm going to click on Register here. And this is going to finalize my installation. Once this is complete, we're going to relaunch the VMM console and check out what is new in the console. Okay, so the registration is complete, and we can see here that the installation is giving us some next steps to create and configure protection groups. and to also enable protection for virtual machines. So we are going to do that, but we're not going to do that until the next video because we still need to configure our Hyper-V server. So let me click on Finish here. So now if I go back to my VMM console, I can see with my host selected, I have this new option here that says Manage Protection. Now this gives us the ability to actually configure protection for our virtual machines. We can click on a single virtual machine and manage its protection. But we are going to do all of that configuration from the portal in Azure instead. But for now, let's jump over to our Hyper-V host and finish the installation there. And our Hyper-V host is right here. This is the one that's going to contain a couple of VMs that I'm going to replicate. In fact, let's just take a look at those VMs. So let's look at Hyper-V Manager. And here we can see the VMs that we're going to protect as part of this video series. But we're going to take all that action from the Azure portal. So let me close that, and let's actually install the agent, which is the last step that we need to complete in this actual video. I've downloaded the agent from the portal as we pointed out earlier. I'm going to install this agent. It's a very quick, straightforward installation. It's basically asking me for a location to install the Recovery Services agent and also a location for the cache. And that's basically the scratch area where VMs that are being replicated are stored. And what we are suggesting here is that this location have free space of about at least 5% of the backup data. Now, this actual agent is also sort of part of the backup agent if you were to back up directly to Azure, and I'll show you what that means. But so you'd want to, if you don't have enough space on your C drive, which would be typical, you might want to define an extra drive for the scratch space. I'm not going to do that in this demo. I'm going to click Next. And then I am asked if I need to connect through a proxy server. I don't. I'm connected directly. And it's also going to provide a check for some prerequisites. I'm good there, all green, and I'm going to click Install. This happens really quick. We're going to copy some files, create a shortcut, and we're almost done already. And then I'm going to click Close once this is complete. All right, now I want to point out one other thing here, and that is that this is saying click Proceed to registration to register the server with the backup vault. We don't need to do that. We are actually using this software as a plug-in to our Azure Site Recovery. This is more specifically talking about a backup vault. We don't need to do that in this case, so I'm going to click on Close. In addition, I want to show something that will be useful for you. If you launch this Microsoft Azure backup, there's only one thing here that you need to be concerned with when you're talking about site recovery. If we go to change properties of our server here, we get the ability through this throttling tab to enable bandwidth configuration throttles. So this actually does affect your site recovery configuration. You can configure work hours, non-work hours, and the amount of control of bandwidth you want during each of those. So just note that's there. That's how you configure that. That's per Hyper-V server. That's how you throttle bandwidth. Okay, we are now complete with video number 4. And all of our components on-premise are installed. In the next video, we are going to go ahead and start protecting virtual machines and finish the registration process.